From the world's greatest library of film classics, we proudly present Greta Garbo, John Barrymore, Joan Crawford, Wallace Beery, and Lionel Barrymore in Grand Hotel. But first, a word from our sponsor. If you smoke the modern way, don't be fooled by phony filter claims.
The Apartment was the third film that Wilder did with his partner, Izzy Diamond, or IAL Diamond. Billy Wilder came out of the German silent era. He started as a screenwriter in German films in the late 1920s and fled Germany in the 1930s and just adapted so beautifully to life in Hollywood.
Billy had been in Hollywood for a little while, and in order to get a permanent residence card, he had to re-exit the country at Tijuana, stay in Mexico for a while, and re-enter. And he had to give a plausible reason why he was going to be an asset to the United States. So he goes to the Consul General in Tijuana, who asks him, Mr. Wilder, why do you want to stay in the States? And Billy looks at him and says, I want to make movies. And the consul looks at him for a second, takes out a stamp, says, make good ones. Isidore Diamond was what his name was Americanized to when he came to this country in 1929. The IAL is now lost in myth. It may have stood for Interscholastic Algebra League, which was a prize he did win in 1937, but you hear him called Izzy a lot. My father was not scared of Billy. Some of the other writers were. They were just too intimidated to work on an equal basis with him.
Billy Wilder became a real Hollywood player, and even though he had an extremely caustic, acerbic wit, he was a very social creature, and people loved him.
He's a man who understood the direst drama and the most farcical comedy.
He had successes all along, a string of hits, The Major and the Minor, Double Indemnity, The Lost Weekend, a whole list of great films. But he was really on top now. He'd just done Some Like It Hot, which was a huge sensation.
He does his slapstick comedy, Some Like It Hot, that's his raging success. You would think that he would capitalize on that and do another comedy, but he didn't. He did this very touching drama that had comic elements.
He certainly didn't want to go remake Some Like It Hot. He wanted to have something else that would challenge his audience in a different way. What's new, what's daring, that's where The Apartment came from.
So I figure a man in his position, he'll take me to El Morocco, maybe 21. Instead, he takes me to Hamburg Heaven in some schnook's apartment.
Billy told me that the basic idea had sort of been in his mind for a considerable period of time.
He had gone to see the movie Brief Encounter in the 40s, and it's a story of a man and a woman who are each married and have an affair and borrow a friend's apartment.
In David Lean's Brief Encounter, there's a very short scene involving the married lovers meeting in an apartment, and Wilder thought, I'm curious about the guy who would lend out his apartment to this cheating couple.
He wasn't that interested in the two people in Brief Encounter. He was interested in the guy who had the apartment that he loaned to these people. You know, what does this guy do when he comes home and his apartment's been used for this illicit romance?
What's it like for him to get back into that warm bed? He was touched by this character and he wanted to pursue it more.
But he knew in the 40s that he could never get away with a concept like that. And then in the mid-50s, there was a very highly publicized incident involving the producer Walter Wanger and the agent Jennings Lang. Lang had been sleeping with Wanger's wife, the actress Joan Bennett, and Wanger shot Lang.
Billy Wilder was very, very aware of the scandal, and everybody knew Jennings Lang would often take Joan Bennett to an apartment out of the way.
And it turned out that Lang had been using the apartment of one of his subordinates at the talent agency. So here suddenly the notion came, well, you know, maybe this subordinate agent was using his apartment to help his career get ahead.
And that intrigued Billy Wilder, and he says that was the genesis of The Apartment.
But with The Apartment, I think what kept it from coming together until 1960 was censorship. This is an adultery comedy.
By the time of The Apartment, it was a little bit easier to deal with questions of infidelity and adultery in a mainstream Hollywood film.
The production code is losing its grip now, so movies are getting a little bit more adventurous sexually, but still, it was controversial, and Wilder was a bit of a provocateur. He loved to shock.
Wilder felt that the production code and what it stood for, the do's and the don'ts, were very, very bourgeois, and he was there to exploit it. The production codes, they were stronger on marriage, that marriage has to be respected, that two people in a marriage relationship, we shouldn't see them having affairs. The Apartment flew in the face of that.
Suddenly you had this film where people are very clearly having sex, and this really was novel, unprecedented. The Apartment really was a sort of bellwether of the changing times.
Well, what's the panic? I'm going to have another martini.
Oh, please, Sylvia, it's 8:45.
In The Apartment, it's all very accepted. The liaisoning of the married men with these women, they never bring up the morality of it.
They just didn't refer to it with any coyness. It's that lack of coyness that scared people, but it's what the picture demanded.
This is 1960, 7 years after Playboy was published. Sex, Playboy philosophizes, is no longer just for marriage. Sex is not a means to an end, marriage and a family. It is an end in itself. And these guys in The Apartment, the people at the firm, and to a certain extent Baxter, they all subscribe to that. They're all Playboys.
All for one and one for all. Know what I mean?
Yeah, I have a vague idea.
And this is what drives the need for The Apartment. For a very simple reason. One of the more important people in New York at that time was the hotel detective. If you started allowing short stays in a New York hotel then, pretty soon you were filled with hookers. And you were running not a hotel, but a brothel. That's why they had a guy walking up and down the halls, knocking on doors. Hey, you got a woman in there that's not your wife? You're out on the street. So if you wanted to duck out of the office for a quickie, you didn't go anywhere but someplace safe like an apartment.
The overriding thing that is incredible about The Apartment and that makes it a groundbreaking film for its time was the ability to show enormous scope, not just be a comedy, not just be a drama, not just be a sarcastic social comment, but be all of those things put together.
It's a definite tightrope they're walking here between comedy and melodrama. There are jokes within dramatic beats, drama within comedy beats, which is basically what life is like, and it doesn't neatly line up for you. They went where the drama took them.
It's made a number of lists of the greatest comedies of all time, but it's a comedy with a devastating suicide attempt right at the center.
My father, when he was living in Hollywood early in his career, he'd had another friend, another writer, who'd broken up with his girlfriend and come home to find this girlfriend dead in his bathtub, having committed suicide just out of hatred for the guy who'd broken up with her. And this is the kind of thing that stayed with my father as an intriguing situation, so it went into the picture.
Come on, wake up.
It's a risk to throw a suicide attempt into a comedy. But the suicide comes about an hour plus into the picture. If you're believing in these characters, this is just another turn.
That was something that was kind of pushing the envelope a little bit, and there were some people that didn't go to movies for that. They wanted escapist entertainment.
The Apartment opened things up, and life became realistic in the movies. You started to find out what was really happening. And it took a very daring person to do a movie like The Apartment.
And also Wilder elected to make it in widescreen black and white, which gave it a certain drama that most comedies of that era really didn't have. They were brighter and prettier than The Apartment, but this brought a certain reality to the film.
There was a realism in Wilder's work, a realism in so many ways, but one way was in the characters. He always picked average people. People who were like you and me, so we could see ourselves.
Jack Lemmon, we could identify with him, but he was an actor who could be funny, and that was very rare.
The minute Wilder saw what Jack Lemmon did in Some Like It Hot, he wanted him for the rest of his life, because he brought something that Wilder needed.
Some Like It Hot was the breakthrough for Jack Lemmon. He got a nomination as Best Actor, and it's one of the great comic performances of all time. But in The Apartment, Lemmon really got a chance to show everything he could do.
The film that showed the breadth of his talent, I think it had to be The Apartment, because in that wonderfully comedic performance, there was so much pathos. And my father once said something, drama's tough, comedy's tougher, but being funny in a drama is one of the most difficult things of all. And there's so much pathos in The Apartment And so much of that was supplied by Jack Lemmon's performance.
Are you sure this is the right way to wear this?
I think so. Here.
You don't think it's tilted a little too much? I mean, after all, this is a conservative firm. I don't want people to think I'm an entertainer.
What's the matter?
Look, the mirror, it's broken.
I used to go in and watch Jack work when I wasn't called that day. I loved watching how good he was on the first 10 takes, and then Billy was so in love with him that he would shoot to take 73.
Billy, he had Jack in mind before he started to write the script. He wrote it for Jack.
It would not have been made with anybody else. There was not a prayer that anybody else could have stepped into that role.
He was totally different. He had a certain appeal that the other actors didn't have.
Well, considering the era from which he emerged, on one hand you had the He-Man actors, you know, like Robert Mitchum and John Wayne, and on the other hand you had the romantic leads like Rock Hudson and Tony Curtis and Cary Grant, and you had Jack Lemmon.
The other guys were all handsome, tall, Barbie doll types. He was cute, cuddly and warm. You loved him.
People really empathized with Jack Lemmon and would accept anything he would do. And that's why he made The Apartment so likable and so acceptable.
There's something deeply honorable about him that you feel all along. So the casting has a lot to do with the redemptiveness that the film has.
People say Marilyn Monroe is being considered for The Apartment. As a matter of fact, when Dobich is calling to use The Apartment, and on the right hand of the screen is this Marilyn Monroe figure.
I'm getting lonely. Who are you talking to anyway?
And she acts as ditzy, and she talks as ditzy as Marilyn Monroe does.
Listen, kid, I can't pass this up. She looks like Marilyn Monroe.
But Fran has to be played by a cute, fairly innocent projecting young girl. A bombshell's not going to work. And, you know, there's no way you could glam Marilyn down that far. And I've always thought it would be fairly funny to see them try and get the elevator doors closed with her standing in the front of one of those crowded elevators.
Blasting off.
Diamond, at the time, said we needed an actress who could be sexy, funny, and sad. And there were very few actresses who could pull off that combination in a film.
It needed this great pixie-like kind of humor, charm, warmth, and Shirley MacLaine brought it all abundantly to the role.
I think Pop and Billy both saw that right off the top. And especially since it was one of her earlier performances, the command that she was able to bring on screen and the discipline. And yet, that marvelous gypsy soul of hers shone through. And it was a wonderful juxtaposition to Pop's character, who was so self-serving.
What did you do to your hair?
It was making me nervous, so I chopped it off. Big mistake, huh?
No, I sort of like it.
You got a Lulu.
Huh? Yeah, I better not get too close.
Billy Wilder had a great eye for getting the best person for a part. And I think, again, the casting of Fred MacMurray is an example of that.
He did want Paul Douglas for the Fred MacMurray part, because Paul Douglas had played a sort of philandering executive in Executive Suite, but he died right before the shooting.
In 1960, you did not think of Fred MacMurray as somebody who would play somebody who's cheating on his wife. Billy Wilder saw something in Fred MacMurray nobody else did. I mean, Fred MacMurray had kind of a good guy image.
He was working at Disney, and he had my 3 sons. And he was concerned, but, you know, he had done pretty well with Billy before, with Double Indemnity. Billy saw darkness in him, which was pretty cool. He got darkness.
You know, you see a girl a couple of times a week just for laughs, and right away they think you're going to divorce your wife. Now, I ask you, is that fair?
Fred MacMurray actually went to the